Welcome to today's deep dive. Today, our mission is to examine a highly specific, very personal, and honestly just fascinating slice of the internet.
Yeah, it really is. It's super niche.
Exactly. So we are looking at this short journal entry by a hobbyist named Aang, and it was published on August 10th, 2026.
Right.
And it's titled Notes-on-Fishkeeping, Part 313, Substrate Experimentation for a New Breeding Tank. And through this, we are extracting the underlying mechanisms of how we build systems,
hmm
like how we deal with contamination in those systems and really how the human brain processes totally unexpected changes.
Yeah, we are basically dropping into a micro study of pure dedication.
Yeah, I love that.
To fully grasp what is happening in this journal entry, you have to imagine stepping into a highly specialized workshop. You have this massive project underway, one that requires intense biological precision.
Right, it's not casual.
Not at all. The environment you are building isn't there to look pretty.
Yeah.
I mean, it is there to perform a very specific, demanding job.
Hmm.
And then you make a mistake that introduces a completely foreign element right into that engineered space.
Okay, let's unpack this, because to appreciate why this specific mistake matters, we have to understand the stakes of what Aang is actually building here.
Absolutely.
The entry is tagged with these markers like Dwarf Cichlids and sand and substrates. So Aang is setting up a mating aquarium tank.
Yeah.
And I know what a fish tank is, but a mating tank implies something far more technical than just a glass box with some water and, plastic plants.
Oh, for sure. A mating tank is essentially a biological laboratory.
Okay.
When you are trying to breed dwarf cichlids, you are dealing with fish that are notoriously sensitive to their environment.
Wait, really? How sensitive are we talking?
Incredibly sensitive. These are typically species native to very specific regions, often South American river basins, or maybe West African streams.
Oh, wow.
So in the wild, they breed only when the environmental triggers are absolutely perfect. The rainy season starts, the water chemistry shifts, the pH drops.
So the temperature fluctuates slightly too, right?
Yeah, exactly. Everything has to align perfectly.
So you can't just put two fish in a bowl and, I don't know, play some romantic music. You have to literally trick their biology into believing they're in a perfectly safe, ecologically sound microhabitat.
Yes. You are basically building a delivery room from scratch.
A delivery room, I like that.
Dwarf cichlids are usually case spawners or substrate spawners. So they need to claim a territory, they need to feel secure from predators, and most importantly, they need the water chemistry to remain flawlessly stable.
Flawlessly stable.
Yeah. If the ammonia levels spike even a fraction of a percent, the fish will just abandon the breeding process altogether, or the eggs simply won't survive.
Wow. Okay, so that brings us to the substrate, which seems to be the main character of Aang's journal entry.
It really is.
Because when I hear substrate, I just think of that neon pink gravel people put in goldfish bowls.
Right, the classic kids tank.
Exactly. But in a breeding tank, I'm guessing the dirt at the bottom is doing a lot more heavy lifting than just sitting there looking pink.
Oh, the substrate is the life support system of the entire tank.
Really?
Yeah, it is not just flooring. In a specialized setup, the substrate acts as the primary biological filter.
Okay, walk me through that.
Sure, so it houses millions of microscopic nitrifying bacteria. When fish produce waste, it creates ammonia, which is highly toxic to them.
Right.
But the bacteria living in the porous surfaces of the substrate, they consume that ammonia and convert it into nitrites, and then eventually into relatively harmless nitrates.
Wait, so the physical shape and texture of the dirt at the bottom actually dictate how much bacteria can live there?
Exactly.
If you have a highly porous material, you have more surface area, which means a stronger biological filter to keep those sensitive dwarf cichlids alive.
That is the exact mechanical reality of the aquarium. It's all about surface area. And Aang mentions using a vibrant red substrate.
Okay.
In the hobby, red substrates are usually baked clay-based materials, like laterite or specialized aqua soils.
Oh, so they're super porous.
Incredibly porous. They are also rich in iron and often actively buffer the water, keeping the pH slightly acidic and stable, which, as we said, is exactly what dwarf cichlids need to breed.
Okay, so knowing all of that completely changes the context of the inciting incident in this journal entry,
It really does.
because Aang is building this highly functional, chemically balanced delivery room using this porous red clay. And then a mistake happens.
Right, the accident.
Aang unintentionally mixes fine sand into this vibrant red substrate. A slip of the hand, maybe a spilled container, In a purely functional mindset, dropping fine sand into your porous biological filter seems like a structural failure.
Oh, it's a mechanical nightmare if you look at the physics of it.
Really?
Yeah, think about pouring fine silica sand into a jar of
Oh, I
marbles.
see.
The sand doesn't just sit on top, right? It filters all the way down and completely fills all those empty spaces between the marbles.
It clogs the pores. It literally chokes off the water flow that those nitrifying bacteria need to survive.
Precisely. Fine sand is dense and completely inert. It doesn't buffer the pH, and because it packs down so tightly, it creates anaerobic zones.
Anaerobic zones, like without oxygen.
Exactly, pockets where oxygen can't reach.
It-
And if those anaerobic pockets build up toxic gases and suddenly release them into the water column,
Wait, it can just burst into the water?
yeah, it can wipe out a whole tank overnight. So introducing fine sand into a carefully structured, highly porous clay substrate is, a major contamination of the system.
It totally reminds me of baking bread.
Okay, how so?
Well, you have this incredibly precise ratio of yeast, flour, and water, right? And the entire chemical reaction relies on gluten development and aeration.
Oh.
If you accidentally dump a cup of dense, heavy cornmeal into the dough halfway through kneading, you've fundamentally disrupted the mechanical structure of the bread. It just won't rise the same way.
That's a great comparison.
And your first instinct in that kitchen scenario, or I guess in Aang's fish room, is panic. You just want to scrape it all out, throw it in the trash, and start over to protect the integrity of the project.
Yes, and what's fascinating here is the psychological pivot that Aang makes in that exact moment of contamination.
Right.
The expected reaction is frustration. It is the immediate urge to fix the structural failure. But Aang stops, steps back, and observes the mistake.
Yeah, the journal says something totally surprising.
Aang writes in the journal, "To my amazement, the mixture created a delightful, subtle aesthetic feel to it."
A delightful, subtle aesthetic feel.
Right. The pivot from a purely functional setup to a state of aesthetic appreciation happens in a fraction of a second.
It requires a massive mental gear shift to look at a biological hazard and call it delightful.
It really does.
Because when you are that hyper-focused on a goal like breeding these delicate fish, you develop severe tunnel vision. You only measure the variables that contribute directly to the water chemistry and the territory building.
Exactly.
Fine sand drifting into the red clay was definitely not on the blueprint.
Serendipity requires a prepared mind that is willing to be distracted. Aang allowed the visual impact of the accident to completely override that utilitarian panic.
I can actually picture the contrast, too. Vibrant red substrates, especially those clay ones, are visually loud.
Yeah, they are bold and declarative.
And they look somewhat unnatural because the color is so uniform. But fine sand, on the other hand, is usually softer, muted, maybe a pale beige or white. So when the sand spilled and filtered down into the red grains, it probably created this mottled natural texture that mimicked a real riverbed much better than the sterile clay alone.
Totally. Aang couldn't look away, even taking a picture to document the spilled sand for the journal.
That aesthetic arrest just interrupts the functional workflow. Aang is suddenly no longer a technician building a life support system. Aang is an observer appreciating a visual composition.
Which brings up a moment of internal contradiction in the journal that I actually find incredibly revealing.
Oh, the aquascaping comment.
Yeah. After marveling at this visual composition, Aang writes this specific sentence. "While I'm not really into aquascaping, sometimes tiny changes improve the overall aesthetic of the environment."
I have to call Aang out on this.
Up for it.
If you are carefully observing the subtle aesthetic feel of fine sand blending into vibrant red substrate, taking photos of it, and analyzing the visual impact on the environment, aren't you, by the very definition of the word, doing aquascaping?
You absolutely are. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, we're looking at a classic example of how humans navigate identity and labels within highly technical fields.
Okay, tell me more about that.
Well, there is a deep psychological division in many hobbies between the engineers and the artists.
I want to dig into that division. Why would someone actively resist the label of an artist in their own hobby?
In the aquarium world, aquascaping carries a very specific, often intimidating connotation.
Like, it sounds fancy.
It is treated as the high art of the discipline. It was popularized by figures like Takashi Amano in the 1990s.
Oh, okay.
True aquascaping implies grand underwater dioramas, meticulous trimming of exotic plants with specialized scissors, adhering to the golden ratio, and entering intense international design competitions. It is an aesthetic-first philosophy.
Right, and Aang is a breeder. Ang's philosophy is function first.
Exactly.
The tank might normally be filled with ugly PVC pipes for the fish to hide in, or dark, tannin-stained water that looks like tea because that is what the biology demands.
Yeah, they don't care how it looks.
So Ang separates the gritty scientific function of breeding dwarf cichlids from the prestigious formal art of the aquascaper.
Right. Ang views the role as a facilitator of function. Claiming the title of aquascaper feels like crossing a boundary into a territory where aesthetics trump biology, which goes against a breeder's core ethos.
It is the equivalent of a highly skilled mechanic who builds custom racing engines that run flawlessly, right?
Yes.
But when you compliment the beautiful, symmetrical way they routed the exhaust pipes, they just wave you off and say, I'm not a designer, I just make cars go fast.
That's spot on.
They actively downplay their own artistry because they feel it undermines their technical credibility.
Yet what this journal entry proves is that a deep appreciation for beauty naturally emerges, even if you actively reject the formal label.
It really does.
You spend enough time staring into a glass box, trying to engineer an environment where life can thrive, and eventually, the visual harmony of that box is going to matter to you.
Yeah, you can't help it.
Form follows function, but eventually, form asserts its own value. The beauty sneaks up on the technician through the back door of utility.
The beauty sneaks up through the back door of utility. I love that.
Yeah, it's a powerful concept.
The fine sand spilling into the vibrant red wasn't a choice. It was a logistical error that threatened the biological filter. But Ang's brain couldn't help but recognize the visual harmony it created.
And Ang doesn't just acknowledge the beauty and move on to clean it up. The journal entry continues, and the accident actually evolves.
The realization of that subtle aesthetic feel immediately triggers a new cycle of planning. Ang is already projecting this accident into the future.
Exactly.
Because Ang writes, hence, I was wondering about the possibility of increasing the ratio of vibrant red substrates to enhance the overall look.
Yeah, that part is key.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The accident has officially transitioned into a deliberate, planned experiment. Ang is no longer just accepting a chaotic spill in the utility room. Ang is reverse engineering the spill to control and scale the aesthetics for the next setup.
And this raises an important question about how we process anomalies in our own routines.
Okay, how so?
The difference between a fleeting moment of serendipity like just a happy accident and a permanent improvement in a methodology is documentation and iteration.
Ah, right.
Which brings us to the most vital piece of context in this entire deep dive. The title of the post, Part 313.
We absolutely cannot gloss over Part 313.
No, we can't.
Because you do not reach entry number 313 in a fish-keeping journal by casually throwing some dirt in a bowl every few months.
Definitely not.
This implies years of meticulous record-keeping. Ang operates like a scientist running longitudinal studies right in their own living room.
The mindset of a dedicated diarist is deeply rooted in the scientific method.
Yeah.
When a technician encounters an anomaly, like the unintentional mixing of inert sand and porous red clay, the instinct is to document the variables. Ang observed the anomaly.
Check.
Ang noted the result, a delightful aesthetic.
Check.
And then, crucially, Ang formed a hypothesis for the future. Manipulating the ratio of the vibrant red substrate against the fine sand will further enhance the overall look.
Ang took a random, potentially disastrous mechanical error and mechanically engineered it into a repeatable process.
Yep.
The journal entry explicitly states, it is something worth exploring in the near future, especially for this new tank I'm currently preparing for my next pair of dwarf cichlids.
Wow.
The future architecture of that delivery room is already being shaped by one clumsy moment with a container of sand.
And that trajectory is the fundamental history of innovation.
Really? You think it goes that deep?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
How many standard operating procedures in engineering or medicine or software development began with someone accidentally knocking over a metaphorical jar of sand in part 12 of their career, realizing it solved a problem they didn't know they had, and by part 313, it simply became the industry standard.
It totally highlights the supreme value of the journal itself as a tool.
It does.
If Ang hadn't taken the time to log this on August 10th, 2026, the subtle aesthetic feel of that specific substrate ratio might have been completely forgotten by the time the next breeding project rolled around.
Most likely, yeah.
The act of writing it down solidifies a fleeting aesthetic impression into institutional knowledge.
A journal is a mechanism designed to trap serendipity.
Trap serendipity.
Yeah. It creates a physical record of the unplanned so that it can be intentionally replicated. Ang is capturing a variable that wasn't even supposed to exist.
Trapping serendipity. I'm going to hold on to that phrase.
Mhm.
Because if we pull back from the fish tanks for a second, our lives are constantly filled with unintentional mixtures.
Oh,
We're always bumping into things, blending contexts, spilling one rigidly planned part of our week into another,
Mhm.
and the instinct is almost always to wipe it up. We want to keep the dense, inert sand away from the highly functional clay. We want to keep our technical work completely separated from our aesthetic impulses.
But Ang's reaction demonstrates the value of pausing before reaching for the broom.
Right.
If you actually look at the mixture before you clean it up and reset the system, you might find that the accidental change fundamentally improved the environment.
Yeah.
The mating tank didn't technically need to be beautiful to function. The biology would have worked without the visual contrast. But the human building the tank needed it to be beautiful.
We started this exploration with a simple utilitarian goal: an aquarist trying to prepare a highly sensitive biological delivery room.
Right.
We witnessed a mechanical disruption, the accidental mixing of sand that could have totally compromised the water chemistry. We saw a realization, the unexpected visual harmony of the mistake.
Yeah.
And we ended with a structured, documented plan for the future, adjusting the ratio for the next pair of fish. It is an entire narrative arc of human discovery, just told in a few brief sentences tucked away on a hobbyist forum.
It perfectly captures the moment of mindset shifts. Ang transformed from a technician optimizing a biological filter into an artist curating a visual landscape, all triggered by a single spilled scoop of substrate. And it happened without Ang ever having to accept the label of artist.
So what does this all mean for you? You are likely not measuring out porous red clay to breed South American river fish today.
Probably not.
You might be structuring a complex spreadsheet for a quarterly review, or maybe organizing the workflow of a new software team, or just trying to build a functional shelving unit in your garage.
Right, whatever it is.
You are operating in utility mode. But whatever rigid system you are building, stay open to the inevitable contamination of your plans.
Absolutely.
When the fine sand of chaos spills into your carefully engineered setup, don't immediately default to panic. Step back. Analyze the contrast. Ask yourself if that tiny accidental disruption might have actually introduced a subtle, delightful improvement to your environment. You might be a reluctant aquascaper in your own discipline.
The most rigidly planned architectures often benefit the absolute most from the introduction of the unplanned.
Yeah, that's so true.
It softens the stark edges of pure utility. It brings a necessary human element to a space that might otherwise just be a sterile machine.
And as we wrap up today, thinking about Ang meticulously adjusting that new ratio of vibrant red substrate, planning the exact visual layout for the next dwarf cichlid breeding tank, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over.
Okay.
It goes all the way back to the inhabitants of this specialized workshop.
The fish themselves.
Exactly. Ang is doing all of this documentation, all of this aesthetic ratio planning for the next pair of dwarf cichlids.
Right.
Putting in the fine sand, measuring out the red clay, ensuring this delightful, subtle aesthetic feel is perfectly executed in the new tank. But you have to wonder, does that highly sensitive, territory-claiming pair of fish actually appreciate the subtle visual improvements of their environment?
That is a great question.
Or is all this beautiful, meticulous experimentation purely a joy for the creator, just looking in through the glass from the outside?
That is the ultimate existential question for anyone who builds worlds for others.
Keep your eyes open for those accidental mixtures in your own life, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.